why we should not insta-4-bet all our great hands. We must always take the most plus EV line with every hand in our range in theory. What happens if we just 4-bet all our strong hands? Our opponent will overall be able to barrel us aggressively, especially on boards which miss our range, 9 high and lower. So, if we face a 3-bet and we're in position and we just 4-bet all of our really, really good hands, there's a good amount of board textures that we pretty much just completely whiff. It might be a king high flop, and it might be a 9 high or lower flop. We just don't really hit those boards no matter what our range is. So, it's especially common if someone like opens the cutoff, gets 3-bet from the small blind, and that player in the cutoff 4-bets all of their ace, king, queens, kings, and aces, because then they just completely whiff king high flops and 9 high flops. This gives us an incentive to start slow playing our big hands. So since our opponent will know we start missing certain boards, he'll start barreling very, very aggressively, which gives us an incentive to call with our strong hands pre-flop because we're going to get paid so well. Eventually, an equilibrium is reached where we are slow playing some big hands and fast playing others. Our opponent can barrel aggressively, but not so aggressively we should never 4-bet anything strong. So this is something that really confused me for a long time. Because the rule that probably sort of helped me more than any other rule when I was learning how to play poker, and I know I've talked about this a lot, it was the rule that said, raise your best hands for value, call with your next best hands, bluff raise your next best, and fold your worst. Now that implies you can rank all your hands from strongest to weakest, which sometimes is going to be more reasonable than others, and it has a lot of problems with that rule, but overall that rule was very, very helpful to me. Once I started doing that, you start noticing the cold calling ranges pre-flop when you're defending against 3-bets, they start to get probably too weak. They start to get to the point where your opponent can just barrel extremely aggressively. One thing you've probably noticed from actually playing cards, if you're playing, most reasonable limits, is when you 3-bet and your opponent calls, you're probably going to be able to c-bet any 2 cards on a whole lot of flops really, really profitably because your opponent doesn't have many strong hands in his range. There's other things going on as well, and it doesn't imply there's necessarily a problem if you can 3-bet any 2 cards profitably, but for the most part, or at least some of the reason why you're able to do it is because people are not slow playing big hands when they should be. We are not slow playing some strong hands for the sake of balance. We are doing it because the opponent barrels so aggressively that it happens to be the most plus EV line in a vacuum with a specific hand. If it makes other hands in our range more plus EV, that's just some happy poker range splash damage, which is a StarCraft 2 nerd reference. So a lot of people, they think the reason why you balance is because, when you balance it makes other hands more profitable. That's not actually what happens from a theoretical perspective. Every single hand you play has to be taking the most plus EV line at every single point. So if it does happen to make your other hands play better, that's just some nice splash damage that just happens to work out. So here, if we're slow playing a really strong hand when we're in position, as we'll go into more detail in a minute, it makes it harder for the opponent to barrel us really aggressively. So that might make sort of our marginal hands more profitable because now our opponent says, well, wait a second, I can't barrel super aggressively into Matt because Matt's not just insta-4-betting all of his ace, king, kings, and aces. He's calling some, which makes it harder to barrel. So that makes our other hands better, but that's not the reason why we're slow playing.